In this lecture, we will discuss a very important writer belonging to the Romantic age, and the name of that writer is William Wordsworth. So, William Wordsworth was born in 1770 and he died in 1850. So, that's the lifespan of William Wordsworth. First of all, we will discuss some important facts relating to William Wordsworth's life and his style of writing, and then we will discuss the various poems written by him, and also one very famous critical work, Preface to Lyrical Ballads, written by him. So you all know that William Wordsworth is quite famous for his nature poet, and that's why he's quite famous as a nature poet. And secondly, William Wordsworth is also a lake poet because he lived near the Lake District, and three poets are considered the lake poets. So, besides William Wordsworth, other two poets are St. Coleridge and Robert Southey. So, William Wordsworth, St. Coleridge, and Robert Southey, they are known as lake poets. William Wordsworth became poet laureate in 1843 and he died, and he continued enjoying this position till his death in 1850. And you all know the first poet laureate had been John Dryden, and John Dryden became the first poet laureate in 1668, and he continued enjoying this position till 1688. Overall, William Wordsworth has written 523 sonnets, and William Wordsworth has also written a tragedy, and the name of that tragedy is Borderers. Actually, you all know that William Wordsworth, he wrote about nature and he tried to convey moral lesson through his poems. So one writer, one philosopher whose name is John Stuart Mill, he lost his mental balance. But when he read William Wordsworth poems, so his sanity came to him, means from mentally disordered he became mentally ordered, and that's why Wordsworth poem proved a remedy, a cure for John Stuart Mill's you can say that insanity. Actually, when William Wordsworth he became the poet laureate, so Robert Browning, who is one of the famous poets belonging to the Victorian period from 1837 to 1901, he criticized William Wordsworth through the poem Lost Leader. You all know that Robert Browning is also a poet. So he criticized William Wordsworth on accepting the post of the poet laureate through this line, for a handful of gold he left us. Means, what is the meaning of this line? That only for a small amount of money he deceived us. Because you all know that when a poet becomes a poet laureate, so definitely that poet he writes according to the monarchy, according to the high class. So his writing gets affected, and that's why Robert Browning he didn't want that William Wordsworth should accept the post of the poet laureate, and that's why he said that only for a little amount of money he left us, he deceived us. P.B. Shelley, you all know he's young. He's one of the poets belonging to the younger generation of romantic poets. And you all know that P.B. Shelley had been a revolutionary poet. So he criticized William Wordsworth for writing nature poetry and by not writing revolutionary poetry. And he called William Wordsworth a moral eunuch. Eunuch, do you know? Kinner. William Wordsworth got highly influenced by John Milton, and that's why, in order to show John Milton's influence on him, he wrote a poem, London 1802, and through this poem, William Wordsworth he praises John Milton through different phrases that I am going to talk about. First of all, William Wordsworth he praises Milton's blank verse. You all know that John Milton has written Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, both in blank verse. Blank verse, do you know? Unrhymed verse means there's no rhyme scheme at the end of the lines. However, in each and every line, there are 10 syllables. That is called blank verse. So William Wordsworth, he highly praises John Milton's blank verse through the line, "Thou hast a voice which is like a sea." Thou मैंने you, hast मैंने क्या होता है have. You have a voice which is like a sea. Means your blank verse is musical. Your blank verse is rhythmical like the waves of the sea. समुंदर की लहरों की तरह आपकी जो blank verse है वो rhythmical है. Now, William Wordsworth, he considered John Milton a special writer, a distinguished writer, and he expressed his distinguishedness through this line. Thy soul was like a star and dwelt apart. Dwelt meaning kya hota hai? Lived. Thy meaning your. So according to William Wordsworth, John Milton's soul was different. It was not ordinary, means John Milton was a special type of poet, and that's why John Milton, he lives separately from other poets, or especially he is special. So that is a line, the meaning of this line. Now, William Wordsworth, towards the end of this poem, he expresses his wish that John Milton would have been alive during the Romantic period. कि Romantic period में John Milton जिंदा होता, and that's why he expresses his wish through the line, "Thou shouldest be living at this hour." Milton, thou shouldest be living at this hour. So William Wordsworth, he expresses his desire, his wish that John Milton would have been alive during the Romantic period. Now, the first important collection written by William Wordsworth is Lyrical Ballads. He wrote this collection along with S.T. Coleridge. So he wrote this collection in collaboration with S.T. Coleridge, and it was published in 1798. And do you know that Romantic age is thought to begin with the publication of Lyrical Ballads in 1798. Overall, there are 23 poems in this collection, and out of 23, 19 poems have been written by William Wordsworth and 4 by S.T. Coleridge. The first poem of this collection is Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which has been written by S.T. Coleridge, and the last poem of this collection is Tintern Abbey, which has been written by William Wordsworth. So you must remember these important facts about the collection Lyrical Ballads. The next very important and very long poem written by William Wordsworth is the Prelude. Prelude, do you know? Introduction. Its subtitle is The Growth of a Poet's Mind. It is an autobiography. Actually, the original title of this poem had been A Poem to Coleridge, but later on, the title was changed as The Prelude. So it was William Wordsworth's wife who changed the title of this poem, and she gave it the title The Prelude. And this question was asked or raised in Master Category exam. So the title The Prelude was given by his wife Mary Wordsworth. This poem was completed in 1805. However, this poem was published after William Wordsworth's death in 1850. This poem is divided into 14 books, and through these 14 books, William Wordsworth talks about his childhood and his development as a nature poet. So this poem is written in blank verse. Blank verse, you know, unrhymed words. Clear, in which there is no rhyme scheme at the end of the lines. However, in each and every line, there are 10 syllables. So this poem is addressed to his friend Coleridge. It is an autobiographical poem. And through this poem, William Wordsworth, he talks about his childhood. He talks about his adulthood. And he talks about his youth. In short, he talks about development of his love for nature. So in the very beginning of this poem, when you read the first book of this Prelude, you find that William Wordsworth says that his love for nature, actually it developed out of two feelings, fear and beauty. Means he was attracted towards the beautiful scenes of nature. However, he was also afraid. He was also terrified of the terrible scenes of nature. So his love for nature initially developed through the mixed feeling of beauty and fear. Clear, but later on, William Wordsworth, he started founding in joy, or joy in each and every scene of nature, whether beautiful or horrible. And in the third stage, he started finding God or the spirit in each and every object of nature. So through this poem, The Prelude, William Wordsworth, he talks about his life from childhood to his maturity. In the Prelude, in the ninth book, there's a reference to the French Revolution through the following lines. This question was raised in the net exam, that in which book do we have the reference to the French Revolution? It is in the ninth book. And this important quotation is, bliss was in that dawn to be alive. Bliss was in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was like heaven. Bliss means happiness. Dawn means, do you know, age? So during the, you can say that French Revolution, which started in 1789 and continued till 1794. So William Wordsworth says that during that period, it was a happiness to be alive. But if anybody happened to be young, अगर कोई उस समय जवान था, तो that period was like heaven for that young person. So through these two lines, he talks about the French Revolution. This question was also raised in net exam. First line of this poem is, oh, there is a bliss in this gentle breeze. Bliss, do you know? Happiness. That there is a happiness in this breeze. Breeze, do you know? Gentle air. Last line is important, of quality and fabric more divine, because he found God, he started founding uh, spirit in each and every object of nature, and that why the last line is, of quality and fabric more divine. I would recommend, if you read all the 14 books, if you have the time, I will suggest you to go through all the 14 books, especially for lecturer cadre. That's really very important if you read all the 14 books. But I have talked about the important points, the main points. So next poem written by William Wordsworth is Excursion. Excursion, do you know? A walk for joy. That is called Excursion. So again, it is a long poem, and the subtitle of this poem is Being a Portion of Recluse, a Poem. This poem was published in 1814, and this poem is divided into 9 books. Actually, William Wordsworth, he wanted to write a very big poem, whom he wanted to call the recluse, and he wanted to make both the prelude and excursion a part of the long poem. But later on, William Wordsworth, the prelude was published as a separate poem, excursion was published as a separate poem. So excursion, you must remember, it was published in 1814. It is divided into 9 books. Initially, William Wordsworth thought to keep this poem as a part of his long poem, Recluse. And through this poem, Excursion, William Wordsworth, he talks about the bad effect of industry. Do you know, Romantic age was also an age of industrialization. So many factories were being set up, and that's why the beauty of the country was being destroyed. So William Wordsworth, he expresses his concern over the destruction of natural beauty through this poem, Excursion. Do you know Philip Larkin? Philip Larkin has also written a similar poem, and the name of that poem is Going, Going. So, in through that poem, Philip Larkin, he also expresses the bad effect of industrialization over England. So, Excursion is a very good poem, divided into 9 books, shows the bad effect of industry. And if you have time, I would recommend that you must go through the detailed summary of this poem, also Excursion, wonderful poem. And that I have already explained you that this poem resembles Philip Larkin's poem, Going, Going. Now we will talk about William Wordsworth first. So the first poem written by William Wordsworth is An Evening Walk. That is the first poem. It was written when when William Wordsworth was in France. Descriptive sketches is the first collection of poems. So the first poem written by William Wordsworth is an evening walk, and the first collection is descriptive sketches. You must remember. Now we will talk about the short poems and some long poems written by William Wordsworth. The very important poem written by one of the important poems written by William Wordsworth is "The World is Too Much with Us." Actually, through this poem, William Wordsworth, he criticizes worldliness. He criticizes materialism. So he criticizes worldliness and materialism. He says that the modern people, they are running after money. And that's why their main purpose is to earn money and to spend money. So by earning and spending money, they are wasting their energy. They are wasting their powers. And that's why he says that modern people, means people of the romantic age, they don't have time for nature. They don't have time for natural beauty. And this is happening in 21st century also. We all are running after money. We are earning money and spending money. We don't have time for natural beauty, for natural scene. And that's why he criticizes worldliness and materialism of the people through this point. The world is too much with us. That's why the title is "The World is Too Much with Us," because we are lost in this materialistic world. And at the end of this poem, William Wordsworth, he expresses his desire to become a pagan. Pagan, do you know? Pagan mean a person who worships the natural objects as gods and goddesses. For example, Tulsi Mata, people, Devta, that is called pagan. And we all are pagans. So towards the end of this poem, William Wordsworth, he expresses his desire to become a pagan. Why? Because William Wordsworth, he wants to live in touch with nature. And that's why he says that he wants to become a pagan so that he may remain in touch with the close touch with nature. Important lines are very important. Sorry, opening lines are very important. The world is too much with us. Earning and spending, we lay waste our power. That we are lost in this materialistic world. And in earning money and spending money, we people, they are wasting their powers. They are wasting their energy. Next poem written by William Wordsworth is Daffodil. I think you must have read this poem, Daffodil, a nature poem, a short poem. And through this poem, William Wordsworth teaches the lesson that nature is a great source of pleasure and nature is also a healer. That nature heals our sorrows, our sufferings. So that's a wonderful message, Daffodil poem. That one day William Wordsworth, he finds himself among thousands of daffodils and he is greatly surprised and he feels a lot of joy. And through this poem, William Wordsworth says that whenever he is sad, so those daffodils, they flash upon his mind and his sadness turns into happiness and he becomes happy again. So there are some famous quotation. For example, the opening line of this poem is really very important. I wandered lonely as a cloud. So in the very opening line, William Wordsworth says that I was walking lonely, and he compares himself to a cloud. As a cloud moves lonely, so one day he was also moving or walking lonely, and all of a sudden he came across thousands of daffodils. And the last 4 or 5 lines are very important. Second is 10,000s I saw at once. Why is this line important? Because in this line or through this line, William Wordsworth has used the figure of speech, and that is called inversion. Because William Wordsworth has reversed the grammatical order. What is the meaning of inversion? Inversion is a figure of speech in which the poet, he reverses the grammatical order. So he reverses the grammatical order. If you look at this sentence carefully, 10,000s I saw at once. So 10,000s is object. So what is the normal order of a sentence? Subject, verb, object. But in this sentence, object is coming before subject. So that's why it's a wonderful example of inversion. So 10,000s I saw at once. But what should be the correct order? I saw 10,000s at once. And the last lines are really very important. Whenever in pensive means sad mood, I lay upon my couch, means when I take rest. They flash upon the inward eye, means I remember those daffodils and fill my heart with the light, and I dance with the daffodil. So William Wordsworth says that whenever he is sad, so those daffodil flowers, he starts remembering, or the picture of those beautiful daffodil flowers immerse in his mind, and his sadness turns into happiness, and he starts dancing with the daffodils. So that's a wonderful line, poem, Daffodils. Next poem is Nutting. Nutting, do you know? Breaking of nuts. Nuts, do you know? Akhroot todna. So through this poem, William Wordsworth, he talks about his childhood experiences. So he talks about his childhood experience of breaking nuts, and he conveys a wonderful message through this poem, Nutting, that there is spirit in the woods. कि जो पेड़ होते हैं, जो जंगल होते हैं, उनमें आत्मा होती है. And this poem was written by William Wordsworth after 38 years. Means he talks about an incident which took place 38 years ago or back in his life. So through this poem, he conveys a message that there's a life and soul in nature. And the last two lines of this poem, they are addressed to his sister Dorothy. Dorothy Wordsworth, I think you know, who is William Wordsworth's sister. And I want to talk about those two last lines. Move along the shade with gentleness of heart, as there is the spirit in the words. Spirit, do you know? Soul. So he gives advice to his sister that whenever she moves or whenever she walks through the forest, जब भी वो जंगल में चले, तो she should walk with the gentle heart. She should touch the trees with softness. Why? Because there's a soul and life in nature. Next poem is Tintern Abbey, which is a long poem written by William Wordsworth. Subtitle of this poem is Composed of 5 miles above Tintern Abbey. Tintern Abbey is the name of the place. Actually, William Wordsworth, he revisited this place after 5 years. So when he revisited this place after 5 years, then he was inspired to write this poem, Tintern Abbey. Actually, through this poem, Tintern Abbey, William Wordsworth, he expresses or he talks about his development of love for nature. This poem was published in 1798. You all know that this was the last poem of the collection, Lyrical Ballads. And this poem was written by William Wordsworth after 5 years of his visit. Now, through this poem, William Wordsworth, he talks about his love for nature. And William Wordsworth says that his love for nature came through 3 stages: as a boy, youth, and as spiritual. First of all, his love for nature was as a boy. Means he used to enjoy the beautiful scenes of nature, and he used to get terrified. डर जाता था. किससे डर जाता था? Of the horrible scenes of nature. Then there was a change in his attitude towards nature, and then his attitude towards nature came as a youth. Means he started enjoying each and every aspect of nature, whether horrible or attractive. Then came the third stage and the most important stage, and that was the spiritual. He started finding God in each and every object of nature. So through this poem, Tintern Abbey, he talks about his development of love for nature through 3 stages. There are some important lines. I would suggest that you can read these poems because you have time, enough time. So you can go through these poems, wonderful poems. I will talk about three or four very important quotation from this poem. Nature never did betray the heart that loved her. Betray means deceive. According to William Wordsworth, nature never deceived the man who loves her. Means if we love nature, so nature also loves us. That's a wonderful message, that nature never deceives the man who loves her. Then still sad music of humanity. This is another important phrase in this poem. Why actually through this phrase, still sad music of humanity, William Wordsworth, he talks about the sorrows and sufferings of human beings. So he talks about their sorrows and sufferings. Now, in these through lines, he talks about his love for nature as a youth because he started enjoying each and every scene of nature. So he says, the sounding cataract, cataract मैंने क्या होता है झरना, haunted me like a passion, means he started enjoying the cataract. He also started enjoying the tall rock, the mountain, the deep and gloomy wood. Wood stand for forest. Means he started enjoying each and every object of nature, the different colors of a forest, their form, different forms of nature. Means he started enjoying each and every object of nature, and that was the second stage. Came the third stage. Now, in the third stage, he started finding God. He started finding soul in each and every object of nature, and that's why he says, a sense sublime of something. Sublime, do you know, high? He started finding high thing, high sense, where in each and every object of nature, far more deeply interfused means intermixed. So he started finding means a divine sense in each and everything, such as in the light of setting sun, he started finding God in the setting sun, and the round ocean, the living air. Means he started finding divine thing in each and every object of nature, setting sun, ocean, air. Clear? In the next four lines, you will also find the same thing. There was a time when meadow, do you know, a piece of land reserved for grazing of animals, जिसे हम चरागाह कहते हैं. So meadow, he started finding meadow. Groove, do you know, when the trees they join, so it becomes groove. Stream, rivers, earth, every common sight. Means he started finding God and soul in each and every object of nature. He says, to me did seem a pearl in celestial light. Celestial, do you know? Divine. A pearl, do you know? जिसे हम कहते हैं drenched, नहाए हुए. So William Wordsworth, he started finding gold in each and every object of nature. Next poem written by William Wordsworth is Ode on the Intimations of Immortality. It's not immorality, it's a immortality. What is the meaning of immortality? When one doesn't die, that person is called immortal. So in short, this poem is known as Immortality Ode. Ode, I think you know, ode is a type of poem which is addressed to a person or a thing. And you know that John Keats is one of the greatest writer of odes. John Keats has written a number of odes. For example, John Keats' Ode to a Nightingale, is addressed to a nightingale. Ode has a universal theme. I'm not going to talk about the features of this ode, but you must remember the title of this poem, Immortality Ode. So this poem was inspired by the metaphysical poet Henry Vaughan. Henry Vaughan, do you know? Henry Vaughan is one of the important metaphysical poets. He has written the poem The Retreat. Retreat, do you know? Going back. So this poem, Immortality Ode, was inspired by Henry Vaughan's poem The Retreat. Actually, Henry Vaughan's, through the poem The Retreat, he glorified childhood. Actually, this question was raised in NET exam, so you must remember. So, this poem, The Retreat, Henry Vaughan, he talks about, he glorified childhood through the poem The Retreat, and William Wordsworth was inspired by Henry Vaughan's this poem, The Retreat. So, as Henry Vaughan, he glorifies childhood through the poem The Retreat. Similarly, through this poem, The Immortality Ode, he also glorifies childhood. So, William Wordsworth, he glorifies childhood through this poem, The Immortality Ode, and he calls childhood the best period of a man's life. You all know that in childhood we are quite near to God. You know, there's some famous quotation here. For example, our birth is but sleep and forgetting. William Wordsworth very beautifully defines birth. That what is birth? According to William Wordsworth, our birth is nothing but sleep. Why? Because as we take birth and as we grow up, जैसे हम बड़े होते हैं, we start forgetting our previous birth. You all agree that when a child is born, so he remembers each and everything, he or she remembers each and everything about his or her previous birth. But as the child grows up, so the child starts forgetting the previous lives. So that this poem is our birth is but sleep and forgetting. And the last two lines are wonderful. Again, it is a long poem. Still, you have a lot of time. I would recommend you that you must read these poems in detail. The poems I am discussing in this lecture because these are the most important poems by William Wordsworth. The last two lines are, to me the meanest flower that blooms मैंने क्या होता है खिलना जिसे हम कहते हैं grooms, meanest means the smallest. So to William Wordsworth, each and everything was important. Even the smallest flower was important, because even the smallest flower used to create thoughts, कहते हैं ना, can give thoughts. Means even the small flower used to create very deep thoughts. For William Wordsworth, can give thoughts that lie too deep for tears. So he talks about his love for nature through this poem, Immortality Ode. I recommend you to go through this poem. Next poem is Michael, which is a pastoral poem, and the subtitle of this poem is a pastoral poem. Pastoral, do you know? A poem, anything whose setting is rural and whose hero is shepherd is called pastoral. So this poem talks about a shepherd. It is set in rural. So through this poem, William Wordsworth, he talks about the tragic death of Michael. Michael had a desire to build a fence around his fields. अपने खेतों के चारों ओर एक वो fence बनाना चाहता था. And that's why he was very poor, and he sends his son Luke to London in order to earn money so that his dream can be fulfilled. But what happens that when his son he visits London, so he falls in bad company and he is spoiled, and his desire is not completed, and at last Michael dies heartbroken. And the epigraph of this poem, epigraph, do you know something written on the cover page that is called epigraph? So epigraph of this poem has been taken from George Eliot's novel Silas Marner. George Eliot, I think you know, one of the famous female novelists belonging to the Victorian period. And there's a very famous quote, he never lifted a single stone, means he died heartbroken. His desire was not completed, his dream was not completed. Next wonderful poem written by William Wordsworth is The Solitary Reaper. Solitary means lonely reaper. Actually, one day William Wordsworth was going somewhere. On the way, he comes across a solitary reaper. Reaper, do you know? One who cuts crop is called a reaper. A girl was cutting was doing work in the field, she was singing a song. She was humming a tune. But that tune was so melodious that William Wordsworth, he gets hypnotized, he gets attracted, he gets mesmerized, and he stops there and he gets lost in the song of the solitary reaper. But all of a sudden, he realizes that he is to go somewhere. So he starts his journey. Even though the song is not heard by William Wordsworth, but still that song keeps on humming in his ear. So that's a wonderful point, solitary reaper. And through this point, William Wordsworth, he conveys the masses that music knows no language. Because that was a highland girl. Highland girl means a girl belonging to the hilly area. She was singing in a different language. William Wordsworth, he didn't know that language, but still, William Wordsworth, he enjoyed that song. There are some wonderful quotation actually in through those quotation. William Wordsworth, he compares the song of that girl to different birds who which sing very beautifully. First of all, he compares the girl's song to the nightingale's song. He says, no nightingale did ever chant, sing more welcome notes to weary bands. Weary means क्या होता है? Tired. Bands मैंने क्या होता है? Group of travelers. Of travelers in some shady haunt among Arabian sands. Means he says that even nightingale hasn't sung such a melodious song to the tired travelers, clear, in comparison to that girl's song. In other words, he wants to say that that girl's songs is sweeter, is more melodious than that of Nightingale's song. Then he compares the song of the girl to the cuckoo bird, because you know that cuckoo bird also sings very sweet. He says, a voice so thrilling never was heard in springtime from the cuckoo bird, breaking the silence of the seas among the farthest Hebrides. Means he says that even the cuckoo bird hasn't sung more sweet, more melodious song than that of a than that of that girl's song. ये वो 4 लाइन है, वो hypnotized हो गया, वहां पे खड़ा होके सुनता रहा. All of a sudden he remembers, okay, I am to go somewhere. He starts his journey, but still he keeps on listening that song in his mind. I listened motionless and still, and as I mounted up the hill, the music in my heart I bore long after it was heard no more. Means William Wordsworth was hypnotized. He listened that song standing there still. And even after, when he started his journey and the voice was not audible to him, but still the music was in his mind and he kept on enjoying that music. Next poem is The Table Turned. And through this poem, he conveys a message that nature is a great teacher, that nature teaches a lot. And so some important quotation are, let nature be to your teacher. And then these 4 lines are really very important. He says, one impulse from a vernal wood. Vernal wood means from the forest. That forest can teach you, may teach you more of man, a more evil and of good than all the sages can. Sages, do you know? Saints. So William Wordsworth says that nature teaches us so many things. And that's why he says that nature can teach about a man, nature can teach about evil, nature can teach about goodness, nature can teach about different aspects more in a better way than all the saints can. Next poem is My Heart Leaps Up when I behold, behold मैंने कहता see, when I behold a rainbow. Leaps मैंने कहता starts jumping. He says that my heart starts jumping when I see a rainbow. It's a very short poem of only 9 lines. And through this poem, William Wordsworth, he conveys the message that nature remains the same. It doesn't change. There's a very famous quote, some famous quotes in this poem that I want to discuss with you. He says, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow. Means when I see a rainbow, my heart starts pumping and jumping. Means William Wordsworth starts enjoying nature. And very famous quotation in this poem is, a child is the father of man. Now that's a wonderful quote. What is the meaning of this quote, that a child is the father of man? It means that by observing a child, a person, by observing a child, we can predict what kind of man he or she will become in future. So a child is the father of the man, means when means by observing a child we can predict that in future what type of person or that child will become. So that's the meaning of this quote, a child is the father of man. Next poem is the resolution and independence. Resolution, do you know? Determination. So through this poem, William Wordsworth, he praises 2 contemporary writers, Thomas Chatterton and Robert Burns. Next poem is Ode to Duty. This poem got inspired by Thomas Gray's poem, Hymn to Adversity. Adversity, do you know? Bad time. And through this poem, William Wordsworth, he talks about morality. Another poem is Written in Early Spring, in which William Wordsworth says that if man is unhappy, if man is sad, if man is suffering from sorrows and woes, why? Because man is himself responsible for his sorrows and suffering. Why? Because man has cut his connection with the nature. And that's why there's a very famous quote, and quote is, what man has made of man. William Wordsworth says that man is himself responsible for his sorrows and suffering. Why? Because man has cut himself off from nature. Now, William Wordsworth has written 5 Lucy poems. You must remember. William Wordsworth has written 5 Lucy poems. Lucy is an imaginary character, and he has written 5 poems about this imaginary character. You must remember the title of these 5 poems. So these 5 poems are 5 poems were written by William Wordsworth between 1798 to 1801. And these 5 poems are, strange fits of passion have I known. 3 years she grew in sun and shower. She dwelt among the untrodden ways. I traveled among unknown men. Slumber did my spirit sail. Slumber, do you know? Sleep. So you must remember these, the title of these 5 lines, 5 poems, because a question may be raised about this, these Lucy poems. Now, some other important short poems written by William Wordsworth are We Are 7, To the Cuckoo, Simon Lee, The Leech Gatherer. These are some important short poems written by William Wordsworth. Now we will talk about one critical work written by William Wordsworth, and the name of that critical work is Preface to Lyrical Ballads. Actually, when Lyrical Ballads was published in 1798, so people, they read 23 poems, but they were not clear about the purpose of these 23 poems. So in order to clear the purpose of these 23 poems, William Wordsworth, he wrote a preface. Preface, do you know? Introduction. And in each and every book contains preface. Why? Because in the preface, the writer, he talks about the theme of his book or the subject matter of his book. So that's why William Wordsworth, he added preface to the collection Lyrical Ballads, which was published in 1800. Now, Lyrical Ballads originally was published in 1798. But when preface was added to Lyrical Ballads, So Preface to Lyrical Ballads was published in 1800. You must remember. And in the preface, he talks about poetry. He talks about subject matter of poetry, function of poetry, language of poetry. He talks about poet. So it was published in 1800. And later on, William Wordsworth, he also added an appendix. Appendix क्या होता है? Something added later on poetic diction. Poetic diction मैंने क्या था? Poetic language. Because S.T. Coleridge, he criticized William Wordsworth's concept of poetic language. Actually, William Wordsworth, he expresses his views about the language of poetry in Lyrical Ballads, Preface to Lyrical Ballads. But later on, S.T. Coleridge, he criticizes William Wordsworth's concept of poetic language. And that's why, in order to reply to S.T. Coleridge's charge, William Wordsworth, he wrote one appendix on poetic diction. Diction means poetic language, and which was published in 1802. Now, through this critical book, William Wordsworth, he talks about concept of poetry, function of poetry, language of poetry, subject matter of poetry. And he also talks about poet. Now we will talk about these concepts one by one. First of all, we will talk about concept of poetry. So according to William Wordsworth, what is poetry? So according to William Wordsworth, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions. So according spontaneous, do you know natural? Overflow means expression. So according to William Wordsworth, poetry is natural expression of powerful feelings and emotions. So according to William Wordsworth, poetry is written naturally. Means it can't be written on order. A poet can't be forced to write on the spot. आप किसी poet को मजबूर नहीं कर सकते कि वो उसी समय लिखे. No, that is not required. Poetry is natural. The poet, he writes poetry when he is in mood. So when the poet is in mood, he writes poetry spontaneously from the core of his heart. अपने दिल से अपने आप poem लिखते हैं. And that's why he says the second part is it takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. Origin means genesis, उत्पत्ति. Recollected मैंने कहता remember, और tranquility मैंने कहता calmness. Now, according to William Wordsworth, writing of a poem is not sudden. अचानक कोई poem नहीं लिखना. Actually, in the writing of a poem, there are 4 stages, which we will discuss on the next slide, maybe on this slide, that there are 4 stages through which an emotion passes before a poem becomes possible. So these 4 stages are observation of some incident, person or thing, now first is observation. In the first stage, the poet, he observes something. He observes a person, an incident, or a thing. Now that observation produces powerful feelings and emotions in the poet, in the minds of the poet. Poet के दिमाग में बहुत सारी feelings and emotions पैदा होती हैं. That is the first stage. What happens in the second stage? Now in the second stage, the poet, he recollects those emotions which he felt originally. जब उसने किसी person या किसी चीज को देखा था, उसको देखने के बाद जो feelings पैदा हुई थी, उनको वो contemplate करता है, उनके बारे में सोचता है. Now, according to William Wordsworth, some time must pass between observation and recollection. Those stages में कुछ time गुजरना चाहिए. Why? Because this passing of time, what will happen during this passing of time? Now, this passing of time is like a filtering process. So during this time, the unnecessary things, they will go out of the poet's mind. कवि के दिमाग से फालतू चीजें निकल जाएंगी, and what remains, जो रहेगा poet के दिमाग में, that will be universal truth. So first is observation, second is recollection, but some time must pass. Then there's a gradual recalling of the original emotion. And then the poet, when he recollects, when he contemplates after some time. So when he contemplates, so he remembers the original emotions. कहते हैं ना, gradual recalling of the original emotion. उसको धीरे धीरे वही feelings आती है when he observed a person or thing for the first time. And what happens? That in the third stage, he becomes emotionally excited. And in the fourth stage is called composition. When in the fourth stage, he writes the poem. So there are 4 stages through which a poem passes, according to William Wordsworth, before a poem is written. First is observation, second is recollection, third is gradual recalling, and the fourth is a composition. Now, William Wordsworth, he talks about function of poetry. According to William Wordsworth, there are 2 functions of poetry. First function is to provide delight, to provide pleasure. So the first function of poetry is to provide pleasure to the reader. Because if the reader doesn't feel pleasure in reading a poem, why will he read the poem? वो poem को क्यों पढ़ेगा अगर उसको आनंद ही नहीं आ रहा? So that's why, according to William Wordsworth, the first function of poetry is to provide pleasure and delight. And that's why he says, verse will be read 100 times, whereas prose only once. Verse, do you know? Poetry. And that's why William Wordsworth says that a poem can be read 100 times. Why? Because a poem provides pleasure, delight. It doesn't make a person bored. Whereas prose only once, that a person can read a poem, can read prose, any prose work only one time, whereas a person can read a poem 100 times. Then, according to William Wordsworth, the second function of poetry is to provide moral lesson. And there are some important quotation. According to William Wordsworth, all knowledge, the whole knowledge is in poetry. And that's why he says, poetry is the breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. What is the meaning of this statement? That complete knowledge is in poetry. And that's why the poetry should provide moral lesson. The poet should provide moral lesson through their poems. And that's why the second quotation is, every great poet is a teacher, and I wish to be considered as a teacher or as nothing. William Wordsworth says that every great poet is a teacher. Why? Because every great poet provides moral lesson. And that's why he expresses his desire that he should also be considered as a teacher or as nothing. Now, language of poetry. William Wordsworth says that language of poetry should be simple. Clear? And according to William Wordsworth, while writing a poem, language used by the rustic people means words used by the rural people, or the language as it is used by the rural people or the rustic people should be used. In other words, poetry should be written in a simple language that even a layman can understand a poem. So that's why he says that the language of poetry should be very simple. It should be as it is used by the rustic people. Pretty famous quote here. Poetry of language should be the selection of the real language used by men. Here, men stand for the rustic people. Real language means the language used by the rustic people in a state of vivid sensation. What is the meaning of in a state of vivid sensation? When people are emotionally excited. So, according to William Wordsworth, the language of poetry should be very simple. It should be the language as used by the rustic people. Then he makes one more statement for which William Wordsworth was highly criticized. William Wordsworth says there neither is nor can be any essential difference between the language of prose and that of metrical composition. Metrical composition stands for poetry. So William Wordsworth says that there is no difference between the language of prose and poetry. But poets, they don't agree with William Wordsworth, especially S.T. Coleridge. He doesn't agree with William Wordsworth. S.T. Coleridge says that there is a difference between the language of prose and poetry. Why? Because in poetry, the arrangement of words is fixed. And arrangement of words is different from that of a prose work, because you know that in a poem, certain syllables are used in a line, there's a rhyme scheme, number of syllables are fixed. Whereas in prose, there's no such type of a foundation. Coleridge, and that's why as to Coleridge, he criticizes William Wordsworth's concept of poetic diction, means poetic language, in chapter 14 of his book, Biographia Literaria. Actually, Biographia Literaria is a book written by S.T. Coleridge, which was published in 1817. And in chapter 14 of this book, S.T. Coleridge, he criticizes William Wordsworth's concept of poetic language. And that's why William Wordsworth, he wrote one appendix on poetic diction, which was published in 1802. Now, subject matter. So William Wordsworth says, as the language of a poem is simple, similarly, the subject matter of a poem should be simple. Poems should be written about the rustic people. Poems should be written about the incident and situations from humble and rustic life. Okay? He says that why the poem should be written about the humble and the rustic life. Why? Because the rustic people, they are pure at heart. There's no artificiality in their life. उनकी जिंदगी में कोई artificiality नहीं होती. They are pure at heart. They don't hide anything. Why? To enlarge the scope and range of poetry. The first reason of writing about rustic people is that William Wordsworth, he wanted to increase the scope and range of poetry, because before Romantic age, the age was neoclassical age. So the writers belonging to the neoclassical age, they wrote about the high class. And William Wordsworth says that poems should be written about low class. So in this way, William Wordsworth, he wanted to extend the scope and range of poetry. Secondly, he says accurate rendering due to intimacy with it. According to William Wordsworth, the rustic are in touch with nature every time. And that's why their feelings, their emotions, they are pure. And that's why they can be presented accurately. Better expression and study of fundamental passions of heart. Ye bataya, because they lack artificiality. Whereas the city people, they are hypocrite. They don't show their real emotions and passions. On the other hand, the rustic people, they are quite humble. They are not artificial. They express whatever is in their heart. And that's why he says that fundamental jo passions and that can be understood more wonderfully in the rustic life. Noble and pure emotion, मैंने बता दिया आपको. Now he also talks about poet, that who is a poet. According to William Wordsworth, a poet is a man talking to men. कहता poet एक आदमी होता है, दूसरे आदमियों से बात करता है, हमारे जैसा तो होता है. However, he makes a distinction between a poet and ordinary people. He says that there is one difference between a poet and ordinary people. And what is that difference? He says that a poet is a man of genius, has more organic sensibility. Organic sensibility means capacity to feel. What is the difference between a poet and an ordinary person? There is only one difference, that a poet has more organic sensibility. What is the meaning of organic sensibility? Capacity to feel. In a poet, there's more capacity to feel. Means when an ordinary person looks at the flower, he is not influenced. He is not attracted. बस उसको flower समझ के आगे चल पड़ता है. But when a poet, he looks at the flower, the same flower creates so many feelings and emotions in his mind. So this is the difference. A poet is like us. He has one nose, two eyes, one mouth, two ears. He is like us. What is the difference? That he has more capacity to feel. So that's all about William Wordsworth. So I hope that you will be able to understand this lecture.